Joining us now is former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. So, Andrew, the attorney's statement essentially says this all is based on information or, as a result of civil lawsuits. Is it common for civil lawsuits to spark interest of Homeland Security and launch an investigation?
Well, it's not uncommon for allegations in civil lawsuits to be considered by federal investigators and federal prosecutors and reviewed to determine whether or not a federal crime may have been committed. And that seems to be what happened here. I thought it was interesting that the attorney's statement really basically confirmed for the public that some of the investigative interest was likely generated from these lawsuits, which is interesting because several of the lawsuits allege activity that likely would fall within the parameters of sex trafficking. Several of these women claim to have been transported from one state to another and then drugged and assaulted, or his former girlfriend who claims to have been forced to perform sex acts with different people in different states as they traveled around the country. So I think it was an unfortunate almost admission by the lawyer. Not that it has legal significance, but it certainly puts us in a position to speculate more accurately about what's actually driving this investigation.
I mean, it's interesting that if that was a mistake by the attorney or unwise wording by the attorney, I mean, they had a day to come up with a statement. It's interesting that that's then what they came up with. I mean, what are some of the reasons why law enforcement officials would choose to execute two search warrants simultaneously and with that level of force? Because that's the other criticism or one of the other criticisms by the attorney, that it was the use of sort of armored vehicles and folks in Kevlar.
Yeah, so why the search warrant simultaneously? Well, again, at the attorney's direction, we can now look to the civil suits for clues. And one of them, for me, is that several of these victims alleged that Mr. Combs and his associates videotaped these sexual encounters. So that is exactly the kind of evidence that you would want to go to someone's home to see if you could find. So I would expect that that was probably included in the search warrants, both at the same time, because once you hit one house, the subject knows that you're probably going to hit the other houses looking for the same stuff. So you're better off doing them. If you have probable cause in two locations, you're better off doing them at once. And finally, the roundhouse swing he took at the show of force, really kind of classic defense attorney tactics to try to turn around a bad press day. But in fact, Mr. Combs has a long history of being investigated for things like assaults, harassment, threatening people with baseball bats and kettlebells and things like that. And the way it works in law enforcement is when you are planning a search warrant, if you have any information, and it doesn't have to be a criminal conviction, just intelligence that indicates that someone who's going to be at that residence may have a violent history or have armed themselves against people in the past, you're going to automatically qualify that search warrant or classify it as armed and dangerous. And that classification alone brings an additional level of protection, of tactical preparedness to ensure that there's no problems, that everything is done in as safe a way as possible. So I think what we saw yesterday was understandable in the context of an armed and dangerous warrant.
All right. Andrew McCabe, thanks very much.